Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, we're going to get started. Could you please take your seats? Thank you. First on my name's Cliff Weiner. I'm president of POA. Thank you for coming. We have two speakers tonight, but first on our agenda, we're going to stand for the pledge to the flag and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Much better, Mike. Just let me quickly remind you that April 20th, we're having a shredding event. You must be a member with paid up dues to participate. Tickets will be cut off as of Wednesday the 10th. Whether we're full or not, I have to notify the shredding company of how many trucks we need. So you have about 6 days left if you're interested in getting a ticket. Send me an email. If your dues are paid, I will email you one back. We're going to do things a little bit differently tonight. We're not going to have all of our business meetings. We have two speakers. We have Public Safety Department's going to do a presentation, Kenny Blacker, our district manager, on the Dependent Fire District, who will be meeting next Wednesday at 1 o'clock at Savannah Center to approve this process. And that's going to be 15 minutes of a presentation and 15 minutes of questions. And I will keep time on it. We did this 2 weeks ago. It worked out good. And then after that, we're gonna have Dr. Danielle Rozier, who's an audiologist with True Ear. We've had her before, and she does a great presentation. And I want to give her the time she needs. So with that being said, Mr. Blocker.
Thank you, Cliff. Good evening. So my name is Kenny Blocker, the district manager, and we appreciate Cliff and the POA having us out for a second time to come out and present this information in reference to the fire assessment, and that Mr. Plensler from PFM will go through the presentation to explain the rationale, how it's developed, and what that means to you as a parcel owner within the territory within the fire district. So I know we're on limited time. Without further ado, Kevin, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Kenny. For the record, Kevin Plensler with PFM. I know I'm on a time limit here, so I'll be quick, but hopefully not in too big a hurry to make sure we get through the slides here to discuss the villages, public safety department, dependent district, and the fire assessment that is in process at the moment. For some of those of you who are aware, the VPSD-DD was formed, I believe, at the end of last year as part of going through the process of providing to provide budgetary services to provide fire and rescue services to the boundaries within the VPS-DDD going forward. And within that, as a result of that, what is required is a special assessment for future fire assessment purposes. So there are many ways to do a special assessment, and we have specifically designed ours to allocate assessments to each parcel and land use based on its relative benefit received via its access and utilization of the fire rescue service. We're going to walk through that process in terms of how we came to some of that analysis and some of the steps that were involved in getting there. One of the first steps was identifying our market area. So I'm just going to click a couple slides forward. For those of you who can see behind me, within the blue bounded area is our district. That represents approximately 67,000 parcels and about, I believe it's 100 square miles. It's a very significant area in terms of analysis. And what we did is, as part of that is ran through and identified all the parcels, residential, non-residential, vacant, agricultural, etc., and did an analysis of the square footage or number of residential units associated with each. And that information was pertinent when we got to the allocation process that we'll show later in the process here. We also worked with the village's public safety department and its budget staff, and they did a detailed analysis of the operational and capital needs for fire and rescue services for the next 5 years. And that budget analysis is going to be provided in here as well. As mentioned before, a special assessment is a little bit different than a tax. A special assessment has to meet a two-pronged test via statute. So the property assessed must derive a special benefit from the service provided, and that assessment must be fairly and reasonably apportioned among the properties that are receiving the special benefit. Under Florida law, local governments are afforded great latitude in terms of how a special assessment is conducted. As I mentioned before, we really wanted to stress trying to allocate those services really based on the utilization of the service, both on a readiness and an actual demand basis, which we'll touch on here in the next few slides. Sorry about that. So as part of the analysis that was conducted, we also looked at a 4-year history of fire rescue incidents response. So we looked at every time the phone rang, essentially for fire rescue services, there was an analysis of where those fire rescue services were being allocated or responding to in terms of residential, commercial, and other uses throughout the VPS DDD. So that data and analysis informed how we were going to do a component of our analysis in terms of allocation of budget. We also work with the village's development company regarding its future development plans with respect to residential and non-residential development over the next 5 years. As you well know, the villages is going to continue to grow for the foreseeable future, and we want to incorporate that that component into our analysis as well. And lastly, as part of the analysis and working with the department and staff and the information they had, we determined that the best type of analysis would really be estimating the 5-year needs of the VPSD in terms of fire rescue service, and then establishing a fixed rate that would account for all the budget needs going forward to create some price certainty for those who are within the district today and those moving into the district over the next 5 years. So here on this slide, if you look at the bottom, you'll see the estimated budget that's going to be necessary over the next 5 years. Pardon me while I get my readers. And as this data shows, our estimated budget is approximately $24.9 million on average, and that's essentially the number we're going to be solving for in terms of our allocation of budget. And that 24.9 is broken out into 2 components, a readiness and availability component and then a service demand component, with the readiness and availability component being allocated to each parcel within the district on an equal basis, and that the demand component is allocated as a function of really the demand for service based on that incidence response data that we analyzed, and is weighted for essentially the land use and the essentially usage of the service. So if you think about it almost like a utility or water fee, we have a base rate, which is our standard readiness fee, and then the usage fee is really for the demand for service. How much of the service in terms of fire rescue service are you utilizing on a regular basis based on land use? The demand for service is allocated on an ERU basis. An ERU is an equivalent residential unit. As you can see, in the equivalent residential unit essentially converts the non-residential square footage to a residential unit. So in this case, our ERU factor is 1,714 square feet, which is the average single-family residential unit size of residential units within the boundaries of the district. That became our divisor in terms of allocating for the non-residential square footage. We understand that there's been discussion of impact fees as part of this process. Note that the VPS DDD does not have the statutory authority to do an impact fee. That power lies with Sumter County. But as part of that, we actually did a detailed analysis of the capital needs of the VPS DDD going forward over the next 5 years. That number was relatively minor compared to the overall budget. So as part of that process, that impact fees really pay for new capital construction and not necessarily replacement of capital needs. And the vast majority of this current budget is really associated with the replacement of items that have been used and are going to be replaced in terms of fire engines and other components, with some new components being added, but it was relatively minor comparatively to the overall budget. As mentioned before, we did an analysis of the incident reports or incident response. And this data was broken out by land use. As you can see in this data here, or if you have the handouts in front of you on page 13, you'll see that the vast majority of responses were to residential units at just over 77%, with the next biggest user or utilization and response to healthcare related, specifically nursing homes, followed by commercial space, and then the balance is relatively minor. Note that there is an uncategorized component of responses. This represented a relatively small component of the sample size. These uncategorized responses were really were when there'd be a response and it'd be responding to an incident on the turnpike or kind of a road or a local area that really wasn't associated with the land use. So we excluded that from our analysis, but given the depth of the sample size, we felt like we had a really good idea from an allocation of demand component, how to allocate these responses and that associated budget with the demand component of our budget. With respect to rate setting, as mentioned before, the goal here was really to come up with a fair and reasonable set of assessments that were going to be fixed for the next 5 years, so that would create some price clarity for the residents and those who are moving into the villages. So that was our recommendation in terms of rate setting going forward. Note that after out into beyond 28-29, we would have to go back through this process based on the new forecasted set of operational and capital needs going forward, probably for the next 5-year period after that. Now we get into the fun stuff. Here come the numbers. So on this page here, page 16, you'll see a breakdown of the allocation, and with respect to residential assessments, these are on a per unit basis and do not vary by unit size. So if you're a residential unit and you live in a 1,700 square foot home, or if you're a residential unit and your home is 2,200 square feet, you'll be paying the same fire assessment fee, where there's no allocation rate set in terms of breaking down ERUs within the residential category. With respect to vacant land, that's done on a per ERU basis as a function of acres. And as mentioned before, the non-residential square footage is allocated on an ERU basis, where we divide that square footage by the 1,714 square feet to generate the equivalent residential unit. So on the top table is the estimated comparison on an ERU basis of what the estimated fire assessment fee will be. Note that these fees are in flux a little bit as we're updating the budget currently, and that these will change a little bit based on any adjustments to the budget or within adjustments to the number of parcels that would be assessed as we work with the property appraiser. But these are pretty close to the final set of numbers. They may vary a little, but we'll be pretty close. And the table below shows the relative comparison to the extent that if you have a larger commercial space or a larger parcel in terms of acreage, you can see the variability in terms of the total assessment. But note that the readiness fee on a per parcel basis is fixed, and that the demand component is really a function of utilization in terms of that weighted allocation of that demand budget component. So in this case, for most people here, which I'm assuming almost all of you here are here residential user or residents within the villages, the estimated assessment for the fire fee based on readiness and demand is a little over $333. From a comparison standpoint, what we wanted to do was look at how the fire assessment fee being proposed here compares to the current fee. For those of you familiar, the current fire assessment fee is a function of two components. The fire fee is a flat rate of $125 plus an estimated 1.31 mils of the taxable value of the home. So when you add those two components together, you get the current fire fee that's being assessed roughly. So on the table below, on the bottom table, you can see the relative cost of the fire fee for a $250,000 taxable value home is around $452. Down below, you can see the proposed funding of a fixed fee of readiness fee plus a demand fee. Plus, you'll see a slight ad valorem component there. We'll touch on that next. That has to do with some exemptions we have to adjust for. But note that when you do the total there, there's savings of roughly $110. And then those savings increase incrementally based on value. Because note that ultimately, the assessment is not a function of taxable value, but it's a special assessment based on relative benefit in terms of the fire assessment fee and how it's being allocated. We did a similar comparison for commercial space. And note that when we break down that commercial space in terms of the current fire fee versus the proposed fee, there's savings are similar to that of the residential in terms of savings per ERU. So in this way, the commercial space is generally being treated as very similar to the residential. And overall, in general, based on how we've done this fire assessment fee compared to how the fee was being, or how the assessment or fire assessment services were being collected by the county, there's generally savings for most property owners within the district as a result of this methodology. One of the items that we have to be cognizant of when we're doing the special assessment is that certain properties within the district are exempt from special assessment, and that's by Florida statute. So by law, we're not allowed to specially assess certain types of properties. That goes for agricultural properties, as well as municipal properties. State, federal, municipal, county type properties are also not subject to special assessment. Also, for purposes of exemption, we included churches, private schools, and nonprofit nursing homes and hospitals as they provide a public benefit. So when we run that analysis, we'll see that there's just under $600,000 of special assessments that are not able to be collected. And by virtue of it being a special assessment, we're not allowed to then push that $600,000 and reallocate it amongst all the properties within the district using the methodology, as there's not a special benefit that is received as a result of these dollars. So one of the ways we're going to offset that, which is typical, is to allocate this via a small ad valorem millage. So if you can see here, the taxable value from the property appraiser data as of January of this year shows the taxable value of all the properties within the district at $16.8 billion. So when we go and allocate that to this just under $600,000 to the various parcels, 67,000 parcels within the district, we generate an estimated millage of 0.034 mils that will be added to the tax bill to account for the offset here of these exemptions associated with the special assessments that would run to these properties otherwise. And lastly, for those keeping up, the next steps as associated with, for this process, are this methodology. An updated version of this methodology based on the most updated budget and parcel data will be presented to the VPS DDD board at its April meeting, which will be April 10th at 1 p.m. And then the board will go through the process of adopting the form and the methodology via resolution, And then following that, we will have a June meeting where there will be a public hearing with an approval of the formal assessment roll. The assessment roll is going to be a long list of all the parcels within the district via parcel ID number, and next to each parcel ID will be information that shows what the fire assessment fee would be for that parcel, and that's going to be provided to the board for its approval. And then those fees would then be provided to the Sumter County property appraiser, and that fire assessment fee would then be put on the November tax bill. And where you would see this would be, typically you have your millages, city, county, etc. And then within that tax bill, you'll see a fire assessment, not ad valorem assessment fee that'll be associated with the fire fee located there. So those are really the next steps. I think I made it underneath the 15 minutes, so that leaves some time for questions, but I'll take it from there.
Anybody got any questions? Okay.
Sumter County is one of the very fastest growing areas in the state. That's very well acknowledged. We have almost $1 billion in new value added each year to the tax roll. It doesn't make sense to me that we have to have a special assessment when we have all this added value coming in. It should come from the general revenue. In addition to that part of the tax increase, we have increases every year as hundreds of homes go off of homestead exemption through sale and get reappraised at a higher value, possibly to go back on homestead exemption. There should be enough revenue to handle this through the general revenue fund. I've seen it done elsewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Appreciate the comment. The county did create this ordinance to create the dependent district for us to go through this process to do the assessment methodology. Yeah, so the county created the ordinance to create the dependent district to go through the process within our boundaries to create the fire assessment methodology to have a special assessment. So the county did not want to run it through their general fund as you're alluding to, like they have been in the past with a small assessment. They wanted us to do this methodology.
Two questions. First off, you said that there were some properties that were going to be exempt.
Yes.
So then are you going to assess them a per use fee so as to capture the value that we're providing them?
Well, as mentioned there, because they're exempt from special assessment, the way we're capturing that is really through the allocation via the millage, the small amount of millage that was going to be collected
From everybody else?
Yeah, everybody else within the district.
But why not capture it directly from them,
Because they're exempt.
but not from per use expenses that you would apply to their use of the product when you do a fire rescue or a visit to the property?
Well, the special assessment isn't as like you're talking almost like a fee for service
Yes.
type. In the special assessment isn't built that way. Like we take the budget and allocate it accordingly. So to the
Right.
extent that there was some other way to collect that fee that way, that would be beyond, kind of beyond the bounds of this budget, this analysis.
Could have potentially been built into it as a way to collect fees from everyone?
Well, once again, I'd still be, if I built it into the special assessment and we still collected a fee for them for fire rescue services, I'd be allocating a special assessment to properties that would be exempt, so I still can't do it that way.
So you can't charge them for the usage?
Not through a special assessment. That'd be, that.
Well, not charging them a special assessment, that's totally off.
If
But
they're,
by use?
if that's the case, that'd be separate and apart from this analysis. So to that extent, if there wanted to be a separate use fee,
Right.
that would be beyond the special assessment
Right.
component. So
To
that'd
be added on later?
that'd be probably a discussion for the VPSDDD board or some other entity. But
It just seems reasonable that, everyone would pay for it.
Right.
Interesting, the process that you went through. Had you thought of using insurance professionals who do fire insurance and rates? Because you're coming up with a process that charges stores and properties way less than what insurance companies would charge them for the same services, because when you do a visit to a store on fire, it's going to be a heck of a lot more expensive than a garage fire.
Well, we could have the chief or talk about the cost of response that way, but ultimately what we're really doing is allocating the budget of the fire for the VPS DDD to allocate. Now, to the extent that there's going to be additional, I mean, it's a system that we're working with, so to the extent that there may be additional cost to respond to a commercial fire, maybe. It just probably depends on the nature of the commercial fire compared to the nature of a residential fire. So
It just seemed more reasonable to go at it from a cost aspect rather than take the budget and throw it at the properties.
Well, we
and
have,
see how to
and
meet
the
budget.
benefit the benefit runs to ultimately the benefit's running to the property to start. So trying to use it on a cost basis, I'm not sure how we would run into that number and backfill it that way. I don't. At least the analysis, we've never done an analysis that way, and we've never had one approved that way before. I guess once again, we have wide latitude, but this methodology we've worked on and used before, and it's been approved.
And I do, I thank you for the work you've done and the fact that we're going to get fire and rescue service.
Right.
It just seems that, why build a new automobile when the insurance company has been coming up with ways to charge for fire insurance for decades.
So appreciate the conversation, appreciate the question, but I would challenge you, we're an ISO rating of 2. I would challenge you to go ask 10 different insurance companies, what does that mean to a homeowner and the discount on their insurance rates? Because we've never been able to get that answer, because they're all different. Some don't even give you a discount. Some give you a discount of 10%. Some give you a discount of 20%. So they're all over the map. So we tried to apply a fair and reasonable and fair methodology for everybody based on what it costs for us to operate the fire service.
We're going to run out of time. I want people
Thank
to
you.
get a chance.
I'm trying to get my arms around the cost of this. And your presentation said $347 for the fire. That's fire only. And there's going to be a budget meeting for the ambulances, which is going to be another charge. And then you've got your millage that you're going to be looking at an increase of 0.03418. Plus, we've got the $4.08 a month coming off from our amenity fees. Have I summarized all of the costs that are going to be coming at us?
So a couple of things. This is just referencing fire and basic life support that runs to the property. The ambulance revenues received from what the county is going to do this year, look at an ambulance readiness fee that they will pay us to help offset the cost of operating our ambulances. In addition, we do get insurance revenue from running those calls, and we do get support from the amenity fees, as well as we do receive an MSTU from Lake County as well.
Well, when we're going to be leasing back, the developer builds the new stations.
That's correct.
And you're going to be recommending that we lease them back. Let's say a hurricane comes or there's a leak in the roof, who's going to pay for the repairs?
So they would, based on what the
Who's
lease-
they?
The owner of the fire station.
So that would be the developer?
Correct.
Okay. And then also I was looking in there on the capital equipment that you're projecting 20-year, I'm assuming, amortization schedule for the equipment, but and you are going to reevaluate or restate the value if you go that route with the what my basic question is, let's say you've got a piece of equipment that's 5 years old, and then you're going to roll that in for your 20-year assessment. What does that do to the life of that used equipment rolling into that program? Is that
a couple of different things. I don't know what equipment you're referencing. Are you referencing a fire engine? Or are you referencing a saw or some type of equipment that goes on the fire engine?
Well, I was
Typically,
actually
those
thinking
you'll
of
pay cash.
the
You'll pay those cash, so you won't have them again. They'll be already paid for. But on a fire truck, we're looking at leasing those. And in this analysis, we did a 10-year lease, but you can get 15 to 20 years out of them.
I saw that. Good idea. By the way, I really appreciate what you did on how you broke down the costs for everybody, because we were sitting at one of the meetings and there was somebody here that just had open land that they let people park their RVs on, and it was astronomical
Right.
what they were going to be paying on that. So this seems, it's never going to be pleasing to everybody, but at least you're going in the right direction.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions. Right now, if you take a look at the tax rolls, there are people who have total disabilities living in the villages. They don't pay anything. How is this going to affect them? Are they still going to be paying zero, or are they going to be paying this new fee?
The way the methodology is set up, there's going to be, as mentioned before, there's a component of the budget that's a readiness fee that's allocated to every parcel, and every parcel within the district is going to be paying approximately $248 in change, give or take, each parcel. And that ultimately then the demand component is a function of utilization and usage based on the incidence response analysis, and that gets allocated accordingly. So you'll have a little range of differences there. But every parcel within the district will be subject to an assessment based on this methodology, because essentially the readiness fee, if you think about it in the context of that fee, is really there to say, hey, we've put in the infrastructure, we have the personnel, we have all this staff. When the phone rings, they will be there to come to your parcel regardless, and you're going to be paying essentially for that component of it.
So they will be paying.
Correct.
That's okay. Then the other thing, my husband pointed out when we were looking at the chart on page 17, it shows the savings, based on the home's taxable value.
Yes.
That's great, but we've been here 18 years, and I never knew that there was a hidden little millage thing up in my taxes every year. I just paid my $124 or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. You guys deserve the money that we give you. And the thing is, where it says savings, okay, then you go back to the other place, the other chart above it. Who's going to make up the difference of this savings? If it's great that we, the homeowners, are going to get a savings, but
Right.
shouldn't the money be there for the budget? Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, essentially, the way the current fee is now collected, essentially, you are generating in the old process. The way the fee was being collected by the county with the $125 fee plus the function of ad valorem, that one component of ad valorem. When you run that analysis through, that generates approximately $30 to $32 million. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly, but now we're solving for a budget of 25. So essentially what was happening is those dollars were subsidizing the county's budget for fire assessment services above and beyond the borders of the VPS DDD. So
you were saying outside the villages.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying.
yes.
Okay.
So that's why essentially we're not losing dollars. It's just that those dollars aren't now available to the county as they were before.
Okay, 15 minutes is up for questions. Thank you, Kenny. If you guys, as they said, there's a meeting, 1 o'clock, Savannah Center, on this coming Wednesday. Be there if you have any questions. There's going to be lots of people there, we hope. So with that being said, it's now time for Dr. Rozier. So bring up your laptop and Mike will help you get it set up. And she doesn't have a time limit. Unless she gets really windy. Okay, Brittany. Ready? Okay. Now we have our speaker from True Ear, Dr. Danielle Rozier. I'm going to save my comments until the end, but she is my audiologist, so I do know her quite well. So it's all yours, Doctor.
Okay, hi everyone, how are you? Good, good. Okay, this is a totally different topic. So, I am Danielle Rozier. I'm an audiologist. I work at True Ear, and I am off of 466 in the Villages, so I am north of here. I am going to do a presentation. I'm going to talk about hearing loss and some of the different causes of hearing loss, and then some different management options, including hearing aids. I started doing kind of some outreach many years ago because I have so many patients and I see it myself looking in the paper, looking online. I put myself in my patient's shoes, and I'm sure it's probably very difficult to know what to do, who to trust if you are experiencing or if your loved ones are experiencing any kind of hearing issue. So my goal is to try to provide some clarity, and I do have time for questions at the end. So I am happy to do that. So just a little bit about myself. I have been in this field for 18 years. I've been practicing independently for 12 years. I did go to the University of Florida where I received my bachelor's and my doctorate. I am happily a veteran provider. I'm a community care provider for the veterans. I've been doing that for several years now. And I am on the board for the Hearing Loss Association. So just to start, we've known for a long time that age and hearing loss go hand in hand. So typically 3 in 10 people over 60 years of age have some degree of hearing loss. And by the time that individuals are 80 years old, 9 out of 10 of them do have a hearing loss. This, of course, is pretty common knowledge, I do think, but what's upsetting is that physicians typically don't screen or recommend hearing tests, so not very many do. And I think advocating for yourself or having some of your own knowledge about hearing loss is important, and having baseline hearing tests are always a good idea. Especially because now we have a lot of research that shows us that there are a lot of comorbidities with hearing loss. So diabetics, for instance, are twice as likely to have a hearing loss. People with cardiovascular disease are more likely. And of course, there are some research studies that show thyroid issues and sleep apnea, even people with those diseases are having more hearing loss. And there are a lot of medications. So back at the table that we have at the back here, we have a list of a lot of medications that are actually ototoxic, which means they are dangerous to the health of the inner ear. And so sometimes, for instance, furosemide, some diuretics, some statins also can affect the health of the inner ear. So because of that, it's also important to have hearing tests done. So I always like to go through some anatomy and physiology of the ear. Whenever you are choosing to find someone to help with hearing loss, it's important to have a very thorough evaluation. So there are a lot of people who will advertise that they will do a free hearing test. And many times that's just a screening. So they're just looking at how you hear several beeps. They're not going through a full diagnostic test. And so I'm going to go through some of this to kind of point out why it's important to have a diagnostic hearing test. So whoever's testing you, whoever's looking, of course, should look in your ear. That should be number one, to make sure there's no wax, there's no blockage. So what we see up here, let me see if I have a mouse. No. What we see up here is the outer ear and the ear canal, and then there's the eardrum, which descends the bones in the middle ear into the cochlea. And the cochlea, it looks almost like a snail shape. It's a little spiral shape. And so by looking in, of course, we can see if there's any kind of blockage in the ear canal. And then there's a test to be sure that the eardrum itself is moving properly and that there's not any fluid or any kind of growth in behind the eardrum. And then there's a test that's called bone conduction testing, and that is going to test the inner ear and isolate that. And that way we can be sure of what kind of hearing loss you have. So just by doing a screening, we wouldn't be able to say for sure where the hearing loss is coming from. And if it's not coming from the inner ear, then a hearing aid may not be the right treatment option for that kind of hearing loss. Typically, though, I will say, especially with those comorbidities that I mentioned, and with age, with noise, a history of noise, noisy jobs or noise exposure, and with genetic predisposition. So some people, they may have a genetic predisposition. All of those things are going to affect the cochlea, the inner ear, that little spiral shape that I showed you here. Because there are small cells inside of that cochlea, and they actually look like cilia almost. They move when sound comes in. We call them hair cells. And these little guys are almost always the reason that someone is having a hearing problem. And what happens is they literally wear down, and they're not sending the sound to the nerve any longer. So these are healthy hair cells, and these are hair cells that have had some kind of damage, whether it's from medication, whether it's just from wear and tear over time with age, or whether it's from noise exposure. Once these cells wear down, they don't regenerate. They don't recover. We can't bring them back. They are trying, but they have been trying for a long time. So in this instance, this type of hearing loss, this person, depending on the degree of the hearing loss, could benefit from a hearing aid. But if you're not going through the diagnostic testing, you can't say for sure that it's not the eardrum or the bone in the middle ear, or is it truly the inner ear? So by doing that diagnostic testing, that's how we determine the correct management for whatever degree of hearing loss we're dealing with. So whenever we're looking at this, it's also very important to go through not just, like I was saying, looking in the ear, evaluating the eardrum, and determining where the hearing loss is coming from. It's important for us to determine the patient's speech understanding and how they're hearing in noise. So those are all, it's a very thorough test. So going in somewhere and having somebody say, do you hear this beep, 5 beeps? That is just a screening. So a very, very thorough evaluation is your number one step to approaching if you are having a hearing issue, if your family is having a hearing issue. Whenever I do a test, I'm going to go here. This is a chart. This is a graph of what that test should look like. It's called an audiogram. And so what we're looking at is from left to right, it goes low pitch to high pitch. And from top to bottom, it goes soft sound to loud sound. The red is the right ear and the blue is the left ear. So if someone had perfectly normal hearing, all of those marks on that graph would go straight across. That would be no problem at all, normal hearing completely. So for this individual, this person has just maybe a slight, not much of an issue in the low pitch, but they have an issue in the higher pitch, because as we go from left to right, that goes to higher pitch. This is the most common configuration of hearing loss that I see for people with those comorbidities, noise insults, and age. So this is very common. This is typically what I find. Somebody with this kind of hearing loss is going to come in telling me, I can hear, but I can't always understand. I can do just fine if I'm looking straight face to face with somebody. But if I can't see their face or they're talking from a distance, I struggle. But the number one culprit is, or the number one issue is, I have trouble hearing in noise or in groups. So typically I can hear, but I can't understand. and I have difficulty when I'm in a noisy environment. That's the complaint from this type of hearing loss. And so because of the anatomy of the inner ear, so let me go back a little bit. So looking at that snail-shaped cochlea there, that little spiral, this is an example of the frequencies that spiral is representing. So higher frequencies are at the start, and as we go down the spiral, it gets to low frequencies. So the reason that most people have a higher pitch hearing loss is because that entrance of that inner ear gets the most wear and tear, or it gets the most noise exposure. So that is why we typically see a high frequency hearing loss, and typically people with that kind of hearing loss feel like they hear, and maybe their spouse or their friends or their family are the reason that they're coming in for the testing, because they feel that they get by okay, and they don't always recognize that there's a more significant issue going on. Because our loved ones are the ones that are going to probably point out to us, you didn't hear me properly. But our friends or acquaintances may not want to embarrass us. Our wife or our friend are the ones that are going to hear us answer incorrectly. So the waitress actually asked you what you wanted to drink, not what kind of salad dressing you wanted. So you told her ranch when she asked you what you wanted to drink. So they feel comfortable enough with us to point these kind of things out. So I see that a lot too. I see people who come in who say, I don't really think I should be here. I'm doing okay. But the significant other is the one that really notices the hearing loss sometimes more than the patient themselves. So one of the reasons that people with this kind of hearing loss will feel that they are hearing but not always understanding is because a lot of the consonants that carry the clarity in speech are in the higher pitch range. And the vowels that carry the volume to speech are in that low pitch range. So this person here, they can hear the vowels to speech, but they can't always hear the consonants. And that's why if they're looking at the face, they might not be lip readers, but they feel that they can do better if they're seeing the face, because if I say a word like pale or fail, you can see that on my face. Whether you claim to be a lip reader or not, it's true. And so with this kind of hearing loss, you may not be able to distinguish the difference between a P and an F, but you can see it on the face. And also, when this person is in a restaurant or in a group, a big group or a crowded place, they will have more difficulty in noise because they're hearing the vowels and the volume of the speech all around them. But again, that clarity, those soft consonants are covered up by those vowels. So if you ever go in traffic and you are sitting there and you're like, where is that music coming from? And you can hear the bass, and you can hear the bass from far, far away. The low pitch travels farther and it covers up the high pitch. So the vowels, sometimes all that volume of vowels in a restaurant will cover up, and it'll travel farther and cover up those softer, higher pitch sounds. Same kind of story. Again, this person will say, I can't hear as well from a distance. I can tell they're talking, but I can't understand them. And that's because, again, those softer, or not softer, but those higher pitch sounds, the high pitch doesn't travel. The bass, the low pitch travels, and the high pitch does not travel. So with this kind of hearing loss, that person has much more difficulty there. So I have a lot of people who come in and they ask me, okay, well, what's the best hearing aid? I get that question every day. And people want to know because you see so many ads and you see so much online even, in the newspaper. And so there's a lot of different styles. So people say, well, what's better? You know, the kind that go over the ear or the kind that go in the ear? Of course, the answer is it depends. And if you are wearing hearing aids, or you're starting to have hearing trouble, or you have a friend or family member who's starting to have difficulty, you might start looking around, maybe looking at people at church or in meetings, trying to see what are they wearing. And you might see yourself or find yourself finding the kind that go over the ear a lot. And the reason for that is the kind of hearing aid that goes over the ear, instead of the kind that fill up completely in the ear, that style of hearing aid is most appropriate for this kind of hearing loss. Okay, and the reason for that, so this is the most common type of hearing loss that we see. And so the most appropriate hearing aid for that is the kind that goes over the ear. So that's why you may more likely see that kind or be recommended that kind. So the reason for that is for this individual, they're hearing the vowels, they're missing the consonants. If I put in a hearing aid that completely plugs up their ear, and what I'm talking about is the ones on the left side, okay? So if I completely plug up their ear, I am actually taking away some of their natural hearing by physically, acoustically plugging up their ear. But when I put a hearing aid over their ear, I can leave their ear somewhat open so they can utilize their natural hearing, and then I can give them the help where they need it. Does that make sense so far? So typically, so understanding your hearing loss, going through just a complete comprehensive evaluation, understanding your hearing loss may help you to understand the right solution for you. Some people want the kind, this happens often too, they want the kind that fills up their ear and goes deep down in so nobody can see it. But a lot of times I have to tell people that is not appropriate for your hearing loss. Unfortunately, you won't hear as well with that because of the type of hearing loss that you have. Now, there are cases where that is appropriate. And in that instance, that person would have to have less residual or less natural hearing in the low pitch, because by physically plugging up the ear, I don't want to take away anything that's there. But if there's nothing that's usable there, I can go ahead and I can do that. Whenever we look at the different styles of hearing aids, that generally really is not going to drive the cost of hearing aids. So it's the computer chip inside that's going to drive the cost, because I can basically put the same computer chip in the ones on the left. I can put the same computer chip in any one of these 6 styles of hearing aid. So that choosing one style over another isn't really going to change the cost. And then there are a lot of manufacturers of hearing aids. These are the 7 main manufacturers. These are the 7 that have the most research and development. They have the most longevity. They're the most robust to withstand humidity and sweat and wax. So there's a lot backing these manufacturers. These are the 7 that most audiologists will work with. However, there are a lot of hearing aid companies out there. There they are. So to try to navigate this can be very challenging for people who start to go through this process, I think, and they go online and they see ad after ad and they get themselves a little bit, they don't know what to do or where to go, and I think they get paralysis by analysis. So again, finding somebody that you can trust that's going to do a comprehensive test and work with you to understand your hearing loss, but not just your hearing loss, your lifestyle and your dexterity, your vision, your personal needs are also going to play into the appropriate recommendation. So like I said before, the technology inside the hearing aid is going to drive the cost. So what I mean by that is, and when I talk about lifestyle, what I'm talking about is not do you play golf or are you riding bike or that kind of lifestyle. What I mean is your listening lifestyle. So if you are somebody, I could have two patients. They could have the same hearing loss. One of them may be a total homebody. They may not leave the house. They may not communicate with many people at one time. They might just want to watch television and talk to their husband or their daughter or whoever. And so that person can do well with a more basic technology as opposed to the person who has a very demanding lifestyle. They're in meetings, they're running meetings, they're in restaurants, they're in big family gatherings, they're in crowded places, groups of people. They're very active socially or as far as their listening lifestyle. So what understanding those kind of needs are important in helping that patient kind of understand what's going to be appropriate for them or what's going to help them the best or what they need. Because always looking at the hearing loss, looking at the lifestyle, and looking at the budget, those are important factors to consider. You should never feel like somebody is just testing you and saying, here's the best thing for you. Here's one option. There should be multiple options. People should work with multiple manufacturers. They shouldn't just magically have 500 of one hearing aid in the back that somehow works for everybody. So looking at that patient and understanding their hearing loss and their lifestyle are so important. So when I talk about that, I can find the most appropriate manufacturer for the hearing loss and for the lifestyle and the budget. So understanding my patient and working with them, and that's all part of that initial evaluation. If you go and you do need hearing aids, that they take the time to work with you and understand your personal needs. Also, if they find something medically going on, that maybe there is fluid, there's some kind of growth, there's some kind of blockage, ear, nose, and throat referral would be the appropriate response for that. So being sure that the hearing loss that my patient has is treatable by hearing aids and is not something that needs medical attention, that's very important. So going through all the different levels of technology, and generally I have like 4 levels here, but generally there can be like 5 to 6 levels of technology that patient can choose from. So when we talk about hearing aids, it's not like getting a pair of glasses. I always tell my patients it's almost a little bit like physical therapy for the ears. So the research tells us that people wait to come in and get hearing aids. They wait. Anybody want to take a guess? This is my favorite part. How long do you think someone waits? They know they have hearing loss. They know they have an issue. How long do you think they wait to get a hearing aid on average? This is like research. 3 years, 5, 10, 7 to 10 years is the average. So if we think about this hearing loss right here, if this person has waited 7 to 10 years, this hearing loss has probably been in the works 10 to 15 years, let's just say. So with hearing aids, if we put hearing aids on and we say, see you later, good luck, it's not going to go well. So if I take this person from, my goal is to take them from where they are to the top of the chart, right? I want to give them enough audibility. I want to give them enough sound to help give them access to all the speech sounds. So if I take them from, you'll see this person, if you can see, I don't know if you can see the numbers there, but in those higher pitches, they're like 60 to 70. If I take them from, let's say, 60 to 70, and I want to give them up to like 20, if I give them all of that at once, and this hearing loss has been in the works for several years or 5 years or 10 years, they're going to go, oh my gosh, no way. I cannot do this. This is too much. It takes several appointments to help people acclimate to what they need. So generally, I find that my patients can tolerate about 60 to 70% of the prescription that they need at first, and then we increase it in increments. So imagine that you're sleeping and you're in the dark and you've been in the dark for a couple of hours, and someone comes in and they turn your overhead light on and you're just blinded. Turn that same light on in the middle of the day, no big deal. If we had a dimmer switch and we just woke you up easy and dimmed that light brighter and brighter and brighter, that would be much more acceptable. So that's kind of the goal. I say it's a little bit like physical therapy for the ears. So that follow-up, that adjustment period is very important. In fact, one of the reasons I'm sure you know, there's a lot of people who just put hearing aids in a drawer. They get them and they just can't wear them. And a lot of times it's because somebody's just put that hearing aid to 100% of the prescription that person need and said, see you later, good luck. Hope it's going to solve all your problems. It's going to be great. No, it takes a little bit of rehab in a sense, a little bit of time and adjustment to do that. And then at the same time, you're coming back and telling us, how are you doing? So we can fine tune a lot of the parameters. I did great at dinner, but then I went to, a meeting and the person was farther away and I was struggling there. So there's a lot of adjustment that can be done to help fine tune it even more for your different lifestyle needs. Of course, dexterity-wise and vision-wise, the hearing aids are rechargeable now. They do help with or work with smartphones and Bluetooth. So there's a lot of other pros, but you do not have to pay extra for rechargeability. Really, not that much extra. If you are being charged extra, you don't have to pay extra for streaming or connecting to Bluetooth with a phone. So when you're talking about different pricing in hearing aids, again, it is the sophistication of that technology inside of it and how well it's adapting in those demanding listening situations. So talking about technology and understanding it a little bit better, if I tell a hearing aid that my patient needs help hearing speech, that's the priority, is that they need help hearing speech, and they go to a restaurant. The background noise at a restaurant is speech. So that hearing aid has to be smart enough to be able to decipher speech from speech. And it has to be able to do that at the speed of sound. So it has to be very fast. So how smart it is, how fast it is very important. Have you ever watched a program on television and the lip sync is off? You can't even, it drives me crazy. So if that hearing aid is slower at trying to process the environment, it's trying to apply the appropriate amplification, but it's slow, you're not going to know it 100% for sure, but you're not going to be able to follow it clearly because it can be delayed. And even a few milliseconds of a delay will throw your brain off if you're watching somebody speak and it's delayed as to what you're hearing. So that's important. And hearing aids do require maintenance. So we generally see our patients every 4 months for cleaning, for adjustment, clean their ears. Every year we like to do a hearing test because we know the hearing loss is not, those cells I told you, they're broken down. They're not going to recover. They're not going to come back. And unfortunately, they're going to continue to decline. So just like glasses, we have a prescription in the hearing aid, and that prescription can be updated, recalculated to be made appropriate for whatever the hearing loss is, generally for years and years to come. And sometimes I've had patients who've gotten like pneumonia, they've gotten fluid in their ears, and they've got a significant change in their hearing. They need their hearing aids adjusted to account for that until that fluid clears. So there's just so many important aspects of the follow-up and choosing somebody that is going to provide that service and that follow-up for you. So it's not just looking for a product, which, that's important, but it's looking for that proper service and that proper follow-up. I just have a little bit more on technology, and then we'll probably do some questions, right? Yeah. So just how complicated and how interesting the inside of a hearing aid is. We have so many components here. And this is what hearing aids I know this one's hard to see. This is the simple hearing aid. It has a microphone, it amplifies, and then it has a receiver or a speaker, puts things out. This is what it looks like nowadays. It's very complex. So there's a lot going on. The hearing aid is trying to help adjust for soft sounds, medium sounds, loud sounds. There's up to 64 channels in it for how it's adapting for different frequencies. It's adapting for noise, background noise. It's looking at focusing. So there's motion sensors in it now. So for instance, if you're sitting down and you go to a restaurant, this is a good example. You go to a restaurant, you walk in, you're walking to your table. You need to be aware of your surroundings. Maybe somebody's coming to greet you, somebody's calling you from behind. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. You get in, you sit down, and now you're having a conversation with somebody, and there's a lot of noise around. So by having motion sensors in the hearing aids, so you know how we have like Fitbits, they know when we're moving, they know what we're sitting too long, it yells at you, stand up, stand up. So the hearing aids have that kind of technology now. So as you're walking through the restaurant, it knows you're walking, and it's more open to help you hear from around you. But then you sit down, you're still, your head is more focused on staying still, and then it knows, okay, this person is focused. I'm going to help to hear from what's in front and cut down what's beside and behind, because that's noise. So it's there's artificial intelligence that's helping it do that now. So a lot of the hearing aids do have artificial intelligence. And all of that is adjustable by the audiologist. So we can make that faster, stronger. Maybe this person is in a wheelchair. They're sitting all the time. We don't really want them only focused what's in front. They might not have a choice that they're not moving and they have to look in front of them. But I'm going to override that. I'm going to say, well, listen, I don't want them always focused forward because they're in a wheelchair. Somebody's pushing them from behind. So just taking into those specifics and really catering it to the patient that's in front of us, that's what's important. That's the audiologist's job, helping the patient through the evaluation process, choose the right kind of management, and then if the management that's proper for that hearing loss is hearing aids, seeing it through to the end and continuing. So hearing aids generally last 5 to 7 years. Also, if you do decide to go get hearing aids, you are by law, you have a right to a 30-day trial period. That means that if you decide to return that hearing aid, you can. And they are not allowed to keep more than 5% of the selling cost if you do return it. A lot of places, if you're looking, do not charge you if you do return it, but by law, you do not have to pay more than 5% of that selling cost if you do return it. If they sometimes call it a stocking fee. Hearing aids generally have a warranty, a manufacturer's warranty, a loss and damage warranty, and then like a service warranty. How long will they help you? How long will they recalculate that prescription? If you have the hearing aid 4 years, 5 years, and your hearing loss continues to decline, that hearing aid can be reprogrammed, readjusted for that hearing loss. Are they going to help you do that for years to come? So those are important factors and important questions to ask. So I think, yeah.
Okay, who's got questions? Gentleman in the front. Right there.
So let's say I'm one of these people that 7 to 10 years ago started having problems with hearing, had a test, there was some loss, but it wasn't enough to be recommended for a hearing aid. So then I start watching the news, and they come up with this over-the-counter hearing aid legislation. Mm-hmm. And then I look into that, and I find out that I can't use my insurance to cover those costs. Mm-hmm. And so now this $400 to $2,000 over-the-counter hearing aid that you can get at Costco is totally worthless to me, mm-hmm. because I can go to a valid audiologist and center to get a better hearing aid for less money. Mm-hmm. What's your insight into that whole situation of over-the-counter hearing aids?
So over-the-counter it's a good idea for specific hearing losses. We kind of see them almost like readers or cheaters, where it does magnify, but it's not prescription hearing aids. So it's kind of that. So they're very, very, very basic. There's no support from an audiologist, and we know that. So let me answer this. For instance, the Veterans Administration, they actually give the top of the line. They give the very, very best to their veterans, but they're overworked. They don't have a lot of time for follow-up care and service to those veterans for the hearing aids. And so a lot of veterans put their hearing aids in a drawer, or they're not very satisfied with them. It's actually one of the most unsatisfied group of hearing aid users. Even though they have the most expensive hearing aids money can buy, they don't have that person who is adjusting it and fine-tuning it and working with them to be sure that it's appropriate, it's comfortable for them. So the lack of that provider is so important. It's detrimental in a way. Now, of course, over-the-counter is good for people who have mild hearing loss, and they may not need prescription hearing aids yet. So kind of like somebody who's 40 years old and says, hey, I can't see it here, I'm going to go get readers, but then if I keep readers on and I go out, I can't see at a distance. Over the counter in quiet, it's going to help, but once they get into noisy environments, or it needs to adapt, or the hearing loss is more complex, it generally is not going to be as good. So that's one of the reasons insurance companies won't help for those products, because it is not prescription hearing aids. Does that help? Okay.
Mike.
I'm just asking for a friend, of course.
Of course.
Hold the mic up to your, sir, hold the mic up to your mouth.
So we know what the bottom is on over-the-counter. How much does it actually cost to get the best Gee-Whiz equipment that you'll be most satisfied with?
So, I mean, that's a good question. So the most private pay out of pocket is going to be like $5,500, $6,000. That is true.
Okay.
Now,
Well, the follow-up question is, out of 10,000 brands and thousands of providers, which of the brands actually has the highest quality, and should we be considering? I mean, that friend should be considering.
So the question, you guys heard the question, of the brands. So again, even I talked to you about the different styles don't generally change the cost. Typically, the brand isn't going to change the cost either. So of these 7 brands, if you work with somebody who works with all the manufacturers, it's not going to change. The price is not going to change. So if you're at the top of the line level, which is not always necessary, that I'll say first of all, but even if you're at the top of the line level, the price is generally the same amongst all the manufacturers. I try to not be, I never want to be biased. I will tell you, of these 7 manufacturers, Oticon, it just happens to be at the top of the list. Oticon right now is doing very, very well. They have really come out with very, very smart artificial intelligence. They are one of the best at approaching noisy situations. So they're one of the smartest noise filters that I see. Signia is also very, very good. Phonak. So those are honestly probably my top 3 choices of all the manufacturers that I have to choose from. But that changes. So like I said, I've been practicing independently for 12 years. The first 2 years, Phonak was my number 1. And then Signia for the next 3 or 4 years was my number 1. And then, so it depends on the research that's coming out. So watching that research and seeing what they're doing. And then, of course, hearing it from my patients. So if I have a patient who comes in and we discuss, we go through, I mean, the initial appointment with me is like an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's a long appointment. I'm going to put people through the ringer on the testing, understand their needs, understand their lifestyle. So if I go through something with somebody and we come to the conclusion that, listen, Oticon, actually, I think it would be great for you. And we work with that, and I have a 60-day trial period. So that's 2 months, because I know it takes longer typically than 30 days for somebody to get to 100% of the prescription that they need. So I like to get them to 100% of the prescription that they need, like I said, in steps, so it's not overwhelming, and then have them have a chance to continue to evaluate it in those different environments once they're at 100%. But if I was wrong, I'll admit it. I'll say, gosh, we keep hitting road bumps. You don't seem to be, the outcome isn't what we expected. The goals aren't being met. Let's change to a different manufacturer, and let's try and see if that one meets our goals, or that one meets our expectation, or that one does better for X, Y, and Z issue that you've presented to me. So having that flexibility is very important. If you work with somebody who's married to one manufacturer, that's all you're going to get. You're going to be tied into that. So I love that. So just like you have to be careful of where you will go to have this done and who you will see, I have to be careful of where I will work. So I don't own this company. I work for this company, and they're privately owned, and they're great owners. But it took me a long time to find them. So I was working in Ocala, and I live in Summerfield. I wanted my daughter to go to the charter school, and so I have to work in the villages. It took me, I think, 4 or 5 years to find somebody that I was willing to work for. Someone who's going to let me see my patients as much as I need to. Someone who wasn't going to make me married to a manufacturer. That I need that flexibility. I need to do what's right for that person in front of me. So those are important questions and important things to consider when you're doing those. I just gave you the longest answer possible. Sorry.
Another question here.
Yes, I had my first hearing aid approximately 20 years ago. My first 2 hearing aids were Oticon, and I don't remember now what I changed. My last, I think this one I have is about a year old. I change about every 3 years, and it has been getting somewhat worse. Anyway, that's just a side issue of who I am and what my background was. My question is, I heard you mention that medications...
Ma'am,
can
you
cause-
have to hold the mic up to your mouth. We're recording this meeting.
Oh, is that okay or not? Is that okay? Anyway, my basic question is regarding these medications. I took your pass out, and there's 3 pages here, which are basically unreadable because of the length of the names of all the medications. Oh, okay. And if you read 3 pages, it's very scary, for heaven's sakes. What have I done? Have I done this? And is there a reason for giving us this, and how can we utilize it?
Okay, so the question about the medications. So like I said, there is a list of medications in the back, and so those medications can be what we call ototoxic. They can affect the health of the inner ear. And so sometimes, well, again, my whole goal is like public service announcement. The more you know. So trying to just give patients as much knowledge as they can. I am not a medical doctor. I'm not telling you to change medications if you have one on that list. But if you have one on that list that you're taking in high dosage, perhaps you could speak to your provider and see if there is another medication that could be appropriate that doesn't have hearing loss or tinnitus, so ringing in the ears too. Statins, a lot of those have a side effect of tinnitus. Maybe there's something else. I don't know. So just the more you know, maybe you could discuss it with your provider and see if there's something else that you could take in place of it. And sometimes you can't. I mean, chemotherapy drugs, diuretics, sometimes it is the nature of the beast. But knowing sometimes maybe that you're on those medications and kind of having some knowledge to plan that it could, the more dosage I take or the more I take of this, maybe my hearing will continue to decline. That was what the purpose of providing that is.
Right here.
First of all, I'm asking for myself, not for a friend. I was at your presentation last year and was very impressed with your presentation, even more so today. And you've talked about working for True Ear.
Yeah.
And there are several locations in the area. Are you working as like an independent contractor under the True Ear brand, or what?
Yeah.
You are?
No,
Or-
so we are, like I said, we are privately owned,
Yes.
and there are many locations in the area.
Yes.
All good providers there. I work in the 466 office.
Well, I know where your office
okay.
is. Yeah.
But I am an employee of True Ear,
Yes.
so they do pay me.
Yes. Okay. So if I were to go to another True Ear, there'd be the same, or not the same as you, but an audiologist. They could do the same testing, whatever.
Right.
Okay.
So all of our offices, they do very comprehensive testing. They are going to spend that time with you like I do to understand, like I said, the need and work through it with you. Yes, yes.
All right. Are you accepting new patients?
Yes, of course. Yes, happily. Yes, if you want an appointment, my cards are in the back,
Okay.
and we'd be happy to see you. Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
Of course.
Last question.
You brought up the word tinnitus.
Mm-hmm.
Could you address the two issues that you see in the paper as far as hearing aids may put back the onset of dementia, and can you really improve lifestyle for people that have tinnitus and severe tinnitus?
Yes. So with tinnitus, what happens is these cells, they send the signal to the nerve. And in these areas where you see an absence of cells, the nerve is still firing in that area, and it's looking for stimulation from the cell. And when it does not get it, it's actually the brain, the auditory cortex in the brain, that is creating the ringing, the hissing, the humming, the crickets, whatever you want to call it. That is where it's coming from. So what happens with this is two things. With getting the appropriate hearing aids, first of all, I meant to say this because this is so important. If you get hearing aids, you should be tested without hearing aids, and then you should be tested with hearing aids in some way to be sure the hearing aids are giving you the appropriate, whether they put a real ear testing, they put a small microphone in your ear and test the hearing aids that way. They shouldn't. How's that sound? Good? Great. It's bye. No. So anyway, so the appropriate hearing aids with the appropriate fitting that's been verified. What those hearing aids do is 60% of the time, sometimes upwards of 80% of the time, people who have ringing in the ears, tinnitus of whatever kind, by the hearing aid stimulating the surrounding cells, so like you see here, those areas that are damaged, they're still functional, but there's areas where there's absence. So by the hearing aid stimulating the remaining cells, it stimulates the auditory nerve and it stimulates the auditory cortex, and then the brain doesn't feel the need to create that sound anymore. So there's no treatment of tinnitus, there's no cure of tinnitus, but by the appropriate stimulation of the inner ear, we give the brain what it's looking for. And then the person who's wearing the hearing aids, most of the time, if they fall in that 60%, they don't hear it anymore. They don't hear their tinnitus while they're wearing their hearing aids. Or we reduce it to an acceptable level that it improves their lifestyle, their quality of life. You had another question. Dementia. Oh, let me go back to the tinnitus. One more thing with tinnitus. If I light a candle in this room and I turn all the lights off, our brain is going to look right at that candle. That's what tinnitus is sometimes with hearing loss. There's no other sound. There's no other stimulation. So not just by stimulating the ear and stimulating the cortex, we help the tinnitus, but by giving the brain other things to listen to, yes, the tinnitus could still be there, but it's not focused on that tinnitus so much. Dementia. Okay, so what we have is there's studies that have come out that talk about, yes, if you have hearing loss, you are more likely to develop dementia. It doesn't mean there's a cause and effect. Just because you have hearing loss, you will get dementia, but you are more likely. So there's theories behind that. The theories are you are overworking other cognitive resources. So you are straining other parts of your brain and overworking those, because if you are having a hearing loss, you are working harder to fill in the gap. You're thinking, she talked about her cousin, but her cousin lives in Idaho, but the person she's talking about doesn't live in Idaho. So you're like constantly fatiguing your brain by figuring out the missing piece with the hearing loss. So if you're not following the conversation, you're overworking other resources to try to fill in that gap. Number two, some people get to the point with hearing loss that they isolate themselves. They're embarrassed, they're frustrated, they don't want to go out anymore. So isolation and depression are definitely can lead to dementia. And then the other thing is, like I was saying, it's a brain thing. So the cells stimulate the nerve stimulates the auditory system in the brain. The auditory system in the brain is connected to so many other systems. So if we have a lack of stimulation, the auditory cortex has a lack of stimulation, therefore other centers of the brain are having a lack of stimulation, and it's the whole use it or lose it theory there. So hearing aids can help, but it's not that hearing aids will prevent dementia, but they're doing a lot of research on that.
Okay. First of all, doctor, thank you.
Yes,
But I'm going to say something. She is my audiologist. I will tell you that I don't go to True Ear. I go to Dr. Rozier. If she left True Ear, I would leave with her. I have had 4 different people that have tried to help me. She's the only one that's helped me at all. Okay, she is about as thorough. She said the first visit is 2 hours. I beg to differ. It was almost 2.5 hours. It's probably the longest visit I've ever had at a doctor's office. She is a true professional. So if you have hearing loss, and lots of us do, you need to see her, whether you get hearing aids from her or not, or you use her. Believe me when I tell you, she's probably the best in the villages. So that's my plug for you.
Thank you.
And we thank you for this. This is the second time, and every time she does this, I learn something else. So you need to think about going to see her. She's somebody special. We have donuts and coffee in the back, and thank you guys for coming.